I'm here today 5 minutes early, which is great. I want to talk to you about something which is kind of intensely personal to me, only in as much as it's something I've been thinking about or trying to make sense of for maybe the last 10, 15, 20 years or so. It's really about making sense of how, let me show you the thing I'm going to read out. So it's really about understanding how we create the universe, or the arrangement of things and relationship between them can be determined in the moment, which sounds like a very lofty goal, because it is, because I've not spent 20 years just to work out how to put lipstick on a thing. I just want to get to the fundamental understanding of how systems are organized and arranged, how we can explore what human behaviors and intents are within a system that they're operating in as actors, and actually using the acquired knowledge that we have about their journey through a system, what inferences we can make about their intents, their aspirations, and how we can respond in the system to be able to deliver them the best experience. Oh, I was getting out of breath when I explained that one, sorry. So that's my lofty goal, which is okay. But I kind of needed to understand as much as I could what the foundational kind of aspects of systems are for me to begin to explore how things work, how they've evolved over time, and how actors in the systems respond to peripheral influences, how we direct them, how they direct themselves, and how they find their own pathways through systems, so that we understand how people think and feel and how we can react at any point in time. So I want to kind of understand, or kind of put myself in a position of how people respond in natural worlds, because natural worlds, like pathways through a forest, if I can kind of use that cheesy metaphor, is interesting because these are kind of evolved pathways over time, over millennia, over centuries, and people have found their own ways through these systems. Now, the interesting thing about these systems are the kind of these incidental moments on your journey. Some paths are well-trodden and well-travelled. Some things are just kind of there and they kind of catch your attention and you're not quite sure why. The interesting journeys are the ones which don't really go anywhere at all. They're exciting, and you kind of question why somebody's begun that path but decided not to go there. But essentially, these paths have evolved over time, like that really terrible, cheesy diagram about user experience and design. Somebody's made a conscious decision at some point to follow a path. Sometimes there's these little signposts on the way. Sometimes you get a clue about what the next step could be in your journey. And these are deliberately inserted into this natural environment, so it becomes this weird hybrid of a kind of natural world and a kind of curated, created world. And so how you determine your path of the system is subtly influenced by somebody else planting a kind of peripheral directional wayfinder for you. Whereas in created worlds, we have often taken it upon ourselves to construct and deliver and guide you through the most intense set of pathways possible to attract your attention. This is Norwich Market. So when I go to Norwich Market, there's any number of ways I can get through this marketplace with a task in mind, but the actual, the interference of my subsystems and actually the compelling calls to action on the way and people influencing my every decision along that pathway makes it really difficult for me to focus and understand where I need to go. I mean, if you happened to be going through Norwich Market and you really were looking for, I don't know, let's say, for example, on a Saturday night you were looking for ducks with an apostrophe S, you could find them in Norwich Market and you'd be very tactically drawn to that. But there's so much peripheral influence and there's so much things going on that suddenly you're in gluten-free handbags, and actually, if you really wanted to find a bag full of people putting Nazis in a bin, they're probably here, but actually they're all distractions. They're all taking you away from the essential journey that you were taking and to fulfill a task. So when you're in this kind of competitive environment with all these influences, you end up feeling a bit like this guy here. I think he knew he came for something, but he's not quite sure what that thing is anymore. So he's looking at, maybe it's over in this direction. Because the overload in your sensory systems when you're navigating this system, I mean, it's really difficult for you to evaluate what the pathways you're going to take because everyone's distracting you along the way. In fact, you give up. And when I'm in this system, I feel a little bit like this guy. I kind of give up because there's too much for me to go on. I'm too distracted. And actually, the task I was there to fulfill I've kind of forgotten where I was going. So the best rendition of that, or in theory, the best rendition of us getting to complete a task based on having a journey, based on us having an objective or a goal, is kind of these curated worlds, like a library. The libraries, in theory, are the best rendition of creating and designing a system whereby we enable you to fulfill a goal really quickly. In this case, me looking for a book. I've got a very long story, which I can't tell you here because this is a very short session. But essentially, I was looking for a book on information theory in my library. So I went to have a look in the library, looking for the shelves, looking at things which looked relevant, hoping for guidance on the way to direct me on my path. And the interesting thing is this is about a physical and digital system. So within the physical system, I wasn't finding what I was looking for. So I went to the digital system, which is part of the same overall system, and tried to evaluate and find the thing I was looking for. But it ended up being a very curious runaround, and the outcome of it was that I was in the wrong library. So actually I couldn't find the thing I was looking for because the signposting and the curation of that journey was so bad that I wasn't even in the right place. So that was just an evolution of the kind of worlds that we inhabit, the kind of worlds we walk and find pathways to in order to fulfill a goal. But my goal and my pontification and my 20-year quest has been to understand how we design and build systems with the intelligence to enable us to predict customer intents and provide the best and the most desired paths and best outcomes for them to reach their goal. So, in considering what kind of things are out there as intelligent systems, and actually this came about through some work that I did with what are they? Financial institution of some sort. Accounting software, actually. We had an open brief to actually reimagine. It was digital transformation. That's what they came to us with. You know, it's like digital transformation is good. Business change is easy. How can you imagine? Or how can I describe to you how you support your customers to find everything that you need through your system in a way that abstracts all the business guff and all the kind of legacy process from that? So I drew a picture of it and effectively said, if you want to support customer intent from any given entry point into the system, how do you rearrange all the data that you have based on a moment in time and an inference you make about a customer behavior such that you can deliver the best experience on any channel? They said, can you just change the brand? So this didn't really go anywhere at that time, but it got me thinking about actually how we construct and build these systems and what the capabilities and possibilities are. So I thought about things we know about, things which feel like they're intelligent. You know, systems which feel like there's some intelligence behind them and deliver us kind of a meaningful outcome based on intentions and questions we have. So I thought about things like Google. You know, an open-ended question, just like ask me one question and we can set you on a path and set you on a journey. How does that actually work? I don't know. Or something like Airbnb, right? This feels sensible, feels intelligent. You know, if I've got an intent, I think they can respond with a reasonably intelligent set of questions to guide me on my path. Now, how I imagine these things look on the back end is a bit like this. So it's a bit like this massive cloud-based entity with this guy from Mass Effect, whatever he is. This guy who's just got like the massive brain which does all this super computational processing and like algorithms from space. And actually they can predict and entertain any inference I have and build an appropriate response because I've got this massive computing power and this super brain which just understands everything I need to do. Whereas we know the systems we have to deal with are a bit more like this. We're basically just like seagulls picking over this shit, trying to find the most appropriate piece of like piecemeal stuff to help you in terms of breadcrumb you along the way. Because the stuff we have to work with in order to be able to construct, design and build the best system often is the biggest problem we have in terms of being able to completely abstract the data, the objects and the meaning from the legacy systems. So, well, I want it to be like this, and I really want this brain to happen. I want this experience for my customers. I actually want this thing to happen, and I want them to feel like this. I want this outcome for my customers. I want to feel like we've provided the best of all possible paths. We understood their intents. We know them so well that we know better than them where they want to go next. And by the way, you can get that wallpaper from this place. So, going back to this diagram, based on some of the things that we believe to be true about some of the best systems in the world, based on our kind of my basic hurried summation of what information systems look like and how we navigate and construct those things, how can we get kind of close to this goal? How can we get close to building and engineering systems that respond in real time to user needs to construct the best path possible through them? So, as all good designers do, I stepped back slightly and said, well, without me actually trying to understand how that thing looks and behaves, what am I trying to achieve? Strategically, what are some principles around how these systems need to work which enable me to think about how we then structure, architect those systems? So I came up with about 7 principles, which some of them were absolute nonsense, but at least they planted a seed in my mind about how we go ahead with this thing. And it just gave me the context within which I can approach the problem. So I thought, correct me if I'm wrong later, an actor may determine and navigate their own flow through a system. So it's not up to me to prescribe the route that you take through the system. It's up to me to respond to your intent and you determine what is your most desired path through the system. So I think it's what I say here. So we should create pathways to support free wandering as well. So if you want to take your own path through the forest, if you want to explore that path over there, we should be able to support you also in just roaming the system in a free way without really prescribing the paths that you go along. In addition, systems should create the most desired of all possible paths. So, based on us understanding what your intent and your behaviours were, from where you are now, and where you want to be, we should be able to construct and manage and build a system which supports the most obvious path for you to take next, the one we already knew you were going to take. I'll drink this in a minute. And the funnel exists, and I have to put this down to use my arms to describe this. 1 second. The funnel exists, fucking hell. The funnel exists, and it has an infinite in and a tiny out. So the funnel starts looking a bit like this. If you think of a funnel, like a sales funnel or analytics funnel or whatever, this is getting embarrassing now, but if you have an infinite funnel, so you can come at any point in the system, there's an infinite number of entry points into the system. Ultimately, what we want to get is like the only one possible outcome is the most desired and the most predicted outcome. So how we do that is, this is where it starts getting a bit silly, but I quite like this. We incrementally, what did I say? Incrementally adjust the angle of intent. So over time, which isn't very long, our understanding of your needs and intents and behaviours, we can incrementally adjust this funnel through the system such that the most narrow set of outcomes is the most desired set of outcomes. And we do that as quickly as possible. And the acquisition of obviously is this thing about, as an actor in this system or as a user of this system, oh yeah, the next thing that I do, the next thing that I'm able to do, or the next pathway in that system is clearly the most obvious thing. It's like, oh yeah, I knew that was going to happen. Of course that's where I want to go next. So that's what the acquisition of obviously is about. But in order to do that, we kind of have to abstract things to a certain level in order to rebuild them. So objects in the system, they kind of have to exist without meaning until we tell them to create a relationship with each other, such that then those objects in the system have meaning in their own right. And that's about the context within which we address those objects as part of the interaction in the journey. So, critical to that, if we've got abstract data which in of itself doesn't mean anything, that can only become information when we tell it to arrange itself in a particular way. That means you have to abstract the objects and the data down to a level where in of themselves they don't have meaning until we know at the point of interaction how to arrange those things for a possible outcome. So, the most important thing about that is the definition of the context and the query we build in order to support an interaction at any given point in time is what gives that data meaning. So, based on those principles, I thought, how does that actually look? So I thought, this is a session about architecting systems. I should probably describe how I think you architect a system to do this thing. And it's quite theoretical. I think what we tend to do, I think we all know this, when we architect systems, we tend to follow this whole thing architecture approach, whereby everything's known. Everything's known in the system. It has an arrangement, it has a taxonomy and a hierarchy. such that we can build navigation models, we can understand scenarios, we can walk through use cases and use stories, and we kind of support the best and most well-known scenarios in that system. We've only got a limited kind of set of tools and resources available to us, but crucially we've got chunks of stuff, we've got bits of things, we've got pages, we've got chunks, we've got whatever you call those little bits of content, chunks. But we can only construct those in a certain way because they have meaning in their own right. So we have to navigate pathways through the system based on the available content that we have. But we know it's more complicated than that, because we know for any given system, there's many actors with many intents, which I just said, and they probably have many paths through the system because of the combination of those two things. So it's not as simple as just prescribing an 80-20 or saying our target audience wants to do this, this, and this, so we can construct that system. That's not good enough for me right now, based on this. So we have to acknowledge all these things as attributes in the system and how we deal with those. So what we tend to do right now is construct these static pathways. We want to go to a bit more of a dynamic pathway model, whereby the path through the system is not prescribed at the outset, but we enable you to have some flexibility in the design of the system, such that at a given point in time, based on an intent and an inference, we can slightly change things. So it begins to address, system-level components and how they're surfaced at an interaction point. But actually, that's not good enough either, I don't think, because we need to kind of focus on behavioral pathways, I think, instead. So rather than thinking about objects in the system and how we arrange those, it's like, how do we respond to the behaviors of the actors in the system and then construct meaningful outputs at any given point in time. So it's about understanding how people are navigating through the system and responding, which is where the intelligence is. I use intelligence, and I think this is where the intelligence is, or can be, such that we can understand human behaviors and respond at a moment in time. So what I put together, because I like doing diagrams with three things in, is a thing I call experience stack, which is just really an illustration, literally an illustration, of how I think we abstract the layers of a system in order to fulfill this goal. So really we have experience layer at the top. There's not white yellow. Got the platform layer, which has got stuff in, which is like technology, which enables us to deliver things. And we have the data down here, which is like the raw data that we have to work on in order to build things. Now, how that works, many actors, many intents, interact at the experience layer, such that platform layer here has the intelligence to deliver and construct an experience based on the data we have here. So it kind of passes up and down at any given point in time. And you have to abstract these layers, because if you try and do it all in one go, or you combine two of these things, you're already solving the problem for customers. You have to really abstract all these layers in order for it to be intelligent. I think it's a hypothesis, don't shoot me, but we know it looks a bit more like this. There's kind of behavioral pathways at the top. We kind of have the technology, whether it's legacy, whether it's like new, whether it's bits of technology that we think are going to solve bigger problems, but there's lots of it. There's different parts of technology, there's different types of technology, and data isn't really data, it's content, because as soon as you put two bits of data together, it's already a chunk of stuff, and it's got meaning in its own right. So, based on that, my desire to abstract that thing to the nth degree, where we are now, I think what we're capable of doing is getting close to that. But what I'd really like to do is understand, as a starting point, if that's true and I want to get much further than that, what are the typical types of scenarios that I want to support? Because I have to start somewhere with this hypothesis. It's all right for me to say abstract things, but if I need to imagine at least some believable scenarios that I want to support with this intelligence system, we have to map a few out, because I've got to start somewhere. I can't just have a hypothesis and not test it. So a useful and interesting exercise that we went through when we were working on potentially this project for this client was just say, well, some of the use cases that this could support in this particular way are this, and this. We came up with about 100, 150 of them. But it's really useful to have those scenarios to evaluate whether, with the experience stack that you have, you can actually even begin to deliver based on the scenarios. And what you end up with is a scenario experience stack, of course, because I like to conjoin things and make new words, which is really about, based on a given behavioral pathway, how do you translate that to an experience such that you can query the platform that it can assemble the data to respond to that intent, which looks a bit like, I think, this being the basic, the crux of the problem about intelligence in systems. How do you assemble, how do you query the system and assemble a thing which is an output in response to that intent? And I think it looks a bit like this. I know this, this isn't new. I'm just rearranging things on a big screen to make a point. But actually, if we have a query for the system based on intent, I think it's mostly about understanding, from an actor's point of view, location, action they have or may undertake, and the intent that they have, as a really pithy demonstration or kind of definition of their behavior in a moment in time. And the data we have to assemble is the data itself, but the attributes of that data, which describe what that data is, obviously the metadata. I'll go into more detail on those, because those things together, I think, are the definition. I'm going to step down here, get this. I think those things together, location, action, and intent, define the context within which that actor is currently in that system at that given moment in time. And these things, obviously, when you assemble those in a particular way, define the content that we deliver back to them. So, if we consider those elements of context, at any given point in time, and acting in the system, location, where have they been? Or where are they right now in the system, and where have they been? So we can understand and infer from behaviors from the path that somebody has already taken. So where are they in the system, where have they been? That's data we can acquire as part of the behavior of them traversing the system. What did they do to get there, and what can they do next? So how did they get to this point in that journey, based on the location they are? How did they get there? What actions did they undertake to get there? And how can we use that knowledge about the actions that they undertook to infer what they might do next? This is important, because this is about intent. What can we infer about their behavior and the aspiration based on location and actions such that we can predict the next desired path for them and use that to construct the data which responds to that? Because once we know that, based on data, i.e. what the data we have and how can we get hold of it through the transport layer, the attributes of that data, like what are the attributes that describe its structure, i.e. relationships. Now, data architecture in this case is kind of amorphous, because what I'm asking a system to do is not respond and interrogate a data structure. We're asking you to build a data structure in real time. We're asking you to architect a system such that we put together the data based on that query, and we construct and invent content which we deliver back at any given point in time. So in order to do that, I believe, I don't know, we have to understand what that data is. So at least data has to have its own definition so we can address it sensibly. We need to understand what the attributes and characteristics of that data are in abstract, in its own right, such that we know how to use it. And critically, we know how it's associated with other bits of data in the system, or what associations or relationships we can create between two pieces of data which in of themselves are unrelated. And how metadata is about relevance. So we have a description about the data in the metadata which describes to us how that might be relevant in terms of this context. That enables us, together with the attributes of it, to really define what those relationships are and how we respond to those in real time. So it looks a bit like this. We end up, I think, with, based on this is all hypothesis and assumption, I think we get to a difficult question which encapsulates our ability to create these intelligent systems which react in time. So for a given context, can we describe an outcome, an experience, for which we can compile a relevant output? Or, in other words, I knew that was coming, I've done this before. Right now, what's the best thing we can make for you with what we've got? So based on everything we've acquired about your intent, your behavior, everything we can infer from that in terms of your path through the system, what can we do next for you based on everything that we have, which is the best and most desirable path, so that it's really fucking obvious that that's the place I wanted to go. And by the way, this was commercial, this project. So there was a little bit of nudge going on. We kind of knew where you wanted to end up, bit of a giveaway. So we were kind of directing you to a place we wanted you to go anyway, to a product of some description. But that was really the kind of the actual practical application of it. Abstract from us having an intent, that's just a useful way for me to frame it when I was thinking about it. If we take away that intent from the outset, or we take away an influence from the business or the system owner, how can we deliver the best thing at any given point in time? So that's what I really want to happen. That's the system I want to architect and build. The trouble with that is, I've never really got closer than the hypothesis around how you architect the system, because I've tried this before, I've tried this in previous companies. We did it 10, 15 years ago at a previous company I worked at, where we did have kind of human behavioral diagnostics going on in the background for systems, and we were trying to deliver, great outcomes based on inferences and pathways, and it was quite primitive at the time, but it kind of worked. But the only thing we could do to deliver something which was radically different in context based on what we knew is just like turn things on and off, like big chunks of stuff. So really it wasn't delivering anything unique or different, it was just like slightly personalizing it, mildly tailoring it to an intent. I think the only thing that makes this actually work is if you can abstract the data that we have down to the lowest level such that in of itself it doesn't have meaning. So for given existing systems, whether that be in financial services, whether that be in hospitals, whether that be in any context of environment that you can think about that systems already exist, almost impossible to take a data set and remove meaning from it. Literally impossible. So I think theoretically you could build this system. Theoretically you could find actors to communicate and relate to this system and build this thing in a complete abstract such that it has no meaning or intent other than the people acting with it. But I think in the real world, no one's going to pay me to build this, right? I would have to pay myself to build this, which ain't going to happen unless I win some kind of lottery. So this is the biggest problem. So what we end up with is a kind of uncomfortable and messy halfway house about how we might nearly achieve this goal in the context of the system we already have based on the technology that's available and the degree to which we can abstract the data, not into data, but into like smaller bits of content. So it's really about having chunks of stuff. That's like a responsive framework. Like, what's the smallest bit of content that I can have? So I can use a framework, like Bootstrap or something, so I can plug things in and out at different points in a predictable frame, such that there's some variation in the journey, but really it's not intelligent. It's just like there's triggers, or there's points in the journey where if you've been here to here, that means a whole different experience rather than reacting in time to an intent. So we don't really get intelligence. We get, I don't know how would I describe this, kind of 3:15 post-lunch intelligence. It's like it's not quite intelligent, but it's slowly waking up. So all we're trying to do, I think, is trying to reconstruct everything that we deconstruct. Which sounds, by the time I get to this point in the presentation, I think if people are still with me, I'm happy, to be honest. But I think if I was to leave you with 3 statements, which says, all I'm trying to say is that if we can do this, if we can deconstruct everything to the lowest level and reconstruct it intelligently in a way that it responds to human intents, that would be awesome. That's all I want to do. That's really all I want to do. That's not a big ask, really. I've been around a bit. I just, I'm bored of doing financial services. I can do the mortgage application process, but can I do something nice and interesting? This is what I want to do. So all I really want to do is do this. Because the megalomaniac in me says, that would be really great for me to build an intelligent system which responds and architects an experience based on everything that we know about you, and we can respond and be magnanimous about it. Because we can't help doing this. We can't help doing this. And there's an inherent risk, of course. You know, if I actually architect this system, I'm going to naturally make it based on my preferences, my biases, and my inherent kind of desire for the outcomes. There's like that peripheral influence when you're walking through the market, when you're walking through a pathway. There's things I can't help if I personally architect a system which do that, which are going to be apparent in the system. So I don't think I can ever truly construct a system which responds uniquely to a specific actor without any kind of previous bias on my part. So acknowledging that, I think, we can't help ourselves. This is the trouble. We can't, because we want, as experienced designers, or if there's any information architects in the house, or as any people who are interested in deconstructing things, or any people interested in how things work and the data and structures and the meaning behind things, because we're all in to draw a picture of how something works before we build it, right? We can't help doing this. We need to understand the structure of everything, or we want to. We want to understand the structure of everything because that makes sense of the world around us. So if we can do that, all I'm trying to do is apply that sense of, understanding how things work to creating intelligence in the system, which is a manifestation of that, which would be awesome. So that's really all I want to do, because we can't help it. And that was all I had to say about it. So I'm very happy that you're still in the room. If you've got any questions for me later, feel free. And I hope that was interesting and valuable. Thank you.